Well, today is Friday, September 13th. And what does that mean? It's Friday the 13th. So, welcome to our Friday the 13th edition of the Chapter 49 podcast. My name is Larry Lannan. I'm a volunteer with Chapter 49, dealing with all things communication. And we represent here at Chapter 49 most of the IRS employees in the state of Indiana. Thank you for joining us, spending a little time with us, and our chapter president for Chapter 49, Duncan Giles. Welcome
Thanks,
back.
Larry. It's always good to be here.
When I think I've asked you this before. We've had a few Friday the 13th recording sessions. What is your view on Friday the 13th?
I have absolutely no problems with Friday the 13th. Now, on Saturday the 14th, when I was younger, I had a fractured wrist and a ankle injury, both on separate Friday the 14th, two different Friday the 14th. So, yeah, I try and stay in the house on Friday the 14th or Saturday the 14th. Friday the 13th, no, it doesn't bother me. Saturday the 14th is when I get hit.
Would you promise me one thing? Would you please be careful tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Yeah, please. We don't want you on the injured reserve list.
Yeah. I got a pitch in the rotation for the playoffs, so you don't want me on the IR.
Yeah, we don't want you to be doing this podcast while you're in a hospital room on your phone. So we don't want any of that. So let's get to our subjects for today. Unfortunately, we're back to the government shutdown. For those who have not been following the blow by blow on this, Speaker of the House had put a bill together. We were talking the last podcast about riders, and he had a rider on there that not only did people of the other party not want to vote for, people within his own party didn't want to vote for. And he at least could count votes and realized that if he put that on the floor of the House the other day, that it was going to go down. And that's embarrassing for a speaker to put a piece of legislation on the floor and have it be voted down. So rather than to do that, he pulled it from the floor, which a speaker can do. And he said, well, we're going to have a weekend meeting and we're going to work out all of our differences and we'll get this done next week. Well, into September is the deadline to get at least a stopgap funding measure or continuing resolution, as they're known, passed so the government can continue to function. So we are facing the possibility of a government shutdown right now. We talked about this last time we got together, Duncan. I asked you what employees should do in reaction, and your response was the same as you've always had in past shutdown crises that we've had, real and the not happening at the last minute type thing, the cliffhanger. So, I mean, I'm just curious what your analysis is. Where do you think we are? And if you had to put a percentage figure on it, what is the percentage chance that we will have at least a short government shutdown this year?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Here we are 17 days away from a government shutdown, and neither party ever wants a government shutdown very close to an election. It just doesn't look well on either party, especially the one who appears to be more intransigent. But we're going to put this rider on there that's going to make something illegal that's already illegal. Okay, is that like Animal House being on double secret probation? I'm confused. But anyway, you want to sit there and go, okay, we just need to fund this for the short term. You need to pass appropriations bills. The talk in the House is that they want to have this rider. They want to have a 6-month CR, and go forward. Well, there's a lot of folks, as you mentioned, in the House and especially in the Senate that say a 6-month CR is not good. The Defense Department has said that if this happens, it will severely cripple them because of flat funding. There are other government agencies that it would hurt as well, including the IRS. And so, most people are saying, well, we need a shorter CR, which some of the House don't want. What I've been hearing and reading, and I don't know if you've seen the same, is basically The Senate is waiting for the House to just send them something, whatever it is. And the Senate then will send back to the House a clean CR that'll go for about 2 months until December, sometime in December, to be passed. And that one I think would be passed. So I think at this point, I'm not counting on a government shutdown because it would really be very foolish politically for it to happen. But, sanity doesn't always reign in DC, unfortunately. I would say there's probably only a 30% chance of a shutdown. But again, I would urge folks to be prepared. You never want to sit there and wait until the last minute and go, okay, I don't have an emergency fund. I don't have any money set aside. How am I going to pay my bills if this happens? You will get reimbursed. You will get paid for however long a shutdown is. And even if we do have one, I wouldn't anticipate a long one. But you want to make sure that you're okay to pay the mortgage, to pay your utilities, things of that nature. You want to make sure you have that money on hand that you're available to do so. So I always have, whether there's a shutdown or not, I always encourage people to have an emergency fund.
I know it's always dangerous to do this, Duncan, but I talked to you recently about a group of well-known experts who are saying that there's going to be a lot of noise. We're going to be hearing a lot of positioning. It is an election year after all. But the experts say there will be a continuing resolution. There will not be a government shutdown before the election. That's the consensus among the experts. But Duncan, as you have alluded to in your description, the experts are not always right.
And when you throw in the fact that you've got a wild card in there for a candidate for president who says, do not pass a CR unless it has this particular rider that is not popular with many in the House, and especially as DOA, dead on arrival in the Senate, it puts even more political pressure on them. Okay, do you send something up is going to fail and stick to your guns, or do you try and come together and get something that will pass so the government can continue to function? It's another wild card in there. I agree with most of the experts that it's usually just, bluster and they would come up with something, but that wild card throws a whole nother dimension into it.
I'm going to talk a little bit about the presidential debate that happened just a few days before we record this. And I saw a lot of chatter amongst federal employee people asking, why didn't the people, the moderators at ABC News, ask about a government shutdown? Why didn't they ask about this? And I'm going to tell you right now, I have not moderated anything close to a presidential debate, but I have been asked to moderate debates like for mayor and other lower level offices. Being the moderator of a debate is a really tough job, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Really hard job. And I thought the moderators for ABC News did an excellent job of getting to some of the major issues. But when you're doing something like a debate and you're trying to figure out what questions to ask, and you got a whole staff of people helping you, it's not so much what am I going to ask, it's what do I have to leave out? And they could easily have put that in there, but they had all the other issues that those moderators brought forward were all major issues for all Americans. So although we as federal employees would have liked to have nailed down the presidential candidates on this potential government shutdown, I'm not going to be critical of those moderators. I thought they did the best they could. They could have asked about it, but I have no problem as a citizen in general of the questions that they did ask the candidates.
I think that's a great point, Larry, that there are so many questions that they probably wanted to ask, but there were some that they had to ask about. Some of the hot button issues that we all know about that they had to ask. So they're like, okay, this is going to be of importance to all the American people. Government shutdown should be of importance to all the government people, but in their minds, it may not impact it as much. So it was further down on the list and they just didn't have a chance to get to something like that. So yeah, absolutely, it's important. And I agree with you. I think the moderators did a fine job. And, I look at trying to moderate and I'm sure you'll probably agree with this, moderate a political debate is sort of like herding cats, trying to get people on point, trying to make sure that, they're answering the questions that are asked, which rarely happens anyway. Um, but it's a very tough job to do. It's thankless because you're going to be blamed by one side or the other, or both, depending upon how it comes out. And, unfortunately, you don't have an unending list of questions that you can continue to go to.
I was asked to moderate a debate in my local community. We had just gone from a town to a city. We were having our first mayoral election, and I was asked to moderate one of the I call them forums debates, whatever you want to call them. And so I was reading everything I could, and I read an article by Jim Lehrer. Jim Lehrer is a retired journalist who did the McNeil Lehrer News Hour and then the Lehrer News Hour on PBS, a highly respected news program, which continues now, but he was a part of the start of that. And he paints a pretty ugly picture of being a debate moderator, particularly the presidential level, where everybody is looking at you, not just within the country, internationally. I mean, the BBC covered that
Right.
debate, that happened the other day, in a lot of English and even some non-English language had interpreters. So it gets worldwide attention when we have a debate on presidentially. But even if you live in a local community and you're having your first mayoral election, and you're asked to moderate that, it was 6 candidates we had at that time in a primary election. That was a tough job, and I don't, I do think that. It was handled well by ABC News. And yes, I understand there's some federal employees and other organizations connected to that who wanted a little more government shutdown, government funding discussion, but I'm not going to complain about that since I've been there, done that, and have some sympathy for those journalists. Let's move on to an issue we have promised we will touch on for every podcast we have between now and Election Day, and that's Hatch Act rules. Hatch Act, it's very important that you know the do's, but also the don'ts. There's some things you can do under the Hatch Act as a federal employee, but there are also things you make sure you do not ever want to do. And Duncan, we do want to let people know when it comes to political campaigns, particularly when it comes to making contributions as a federal employee, going to a fundraiser, and soliciting. Where's the line? What can a federal employee do in an election season under the Hatch Act? What's allowable and what is now not allowable? And I think it's very important that federal employees know where that line is drawn.
Yeah, it can be a lot of, there's some gray area. I wouldn't say there's a lot of gray area, but there is some gray area. The important thing is, can I contribute to a political action committee or particular candidate that I'm very much in favor of? The answer to that is you absolutely have that right to do so. You can contribute those funds to them for anything that you do support. There is no problem with that. It's part of the American experience. You are an American first and foremost, so you have that right. The problem comes in, and the issue that we've seen occasionally, it's not a huge problem, thank goodness, but the problem comes in is when people solicit for funds or even, take or receive, or somebody says, oh, okay, hey, you're going to contribute so much to this particular candidate. Can I give you $10 to go ahead and add that to your contribution? The answer to that would be no, because of the fact that you are a federal employee. You want to be very, very careful about that. You do not want to solicit in any way. There are certain circumstances, certain very narrow circumstances, where you can contribute or ask for solicitation. But for the most part, the vast majority, and I just tell people to steer clear. Well, I want to do a fundraiser or something like that. If you're doing a fundraiser as an individual, you absolutely are going to be in violation of the Hatch Act. Asking for money. Now, there are certain ways that you can do that. I'm not going to get into them because I don't want to muddy the waters. I'm just going to tell folks to be on the safe side. Don't do anything like that. Don't do fundraisers. You can contribute at a fundraiser, but don't hold one yourself. Don't ask people don't solicit, don't take it and then add it to it. If you're wanting to do something like that, uh, you're going to have to look up the ethics rules. You're going to have to talk to very possibly the Office of Special Counsel to make sure that what you're doing is correct, because you do not want to run afoul of these Hatch Act laws. They're rules, but they're also laws. They're put in statute where you could be not only lose your job, but you could technically be prosecuted for. So we don't want that to happen to anybody. So I would rather everyone err on the side of caution. Bottom line is, monetarily, you can support who you want, but do not go out and fundraise or ask other people or even accept money from other people towards this candidate or political action committee, whatever it may be.
I learned this as a tax law specialist, Duncan. Excuse me, when people ask about, should I do this or that? I said, well, you're entering a gray area. Do you really want to be in that gray area? And some people did. I said, well, okay, be aggressive. It's up to you, but this is where the law stands, and you get in this gray area, you could go either way. I think you are giving terrific advice when it comes to federal employees and the Hatch Act. Don't even get close to that gray area. Keep that line on the other side, on the safe side of that gray area, and make sure you're in compliance. Are there some limited exceptions here and there? Perhaps. But you know something? Don't ever want to deal with the Office of Special Counsel. That's their job to police the Hatch Act, and you don't want to deal with these people if you don't have to.
Yeah. I've defended Hatch Act violations before. They are not fun to do, especially if a employee is fired up about the cause or candidate that caused this. You don't want to do it. It's just not a good idea. We've seen higher up officials do this. Some have gotten punished, some have not. But you don't want to take that chance. Trust me, you do not want to take that chance of doing this. Err on the side of safety, contribute to, whatever candidate or political action committee that you wish to do so. That's not a problem as long as you don't do it on government time, government property. Don't use your government phone or government computer to say, hey, I'm going to use my credit card to donate this. I actually had a person one time that did use a government credit card to donate to a political candidate. That would be an extreme no-no. So, you want to be very careful. They did it inadvertently, but, you want to be very careful about this type of thing.
In my time as both a union official and later as a manager, I'm sorry, Duncan, I remain astounded at what some people do with their government credit cards. I hadn't heard that one. That's a new one. Somebody actually made, excuse me, a political contribution on their government credit card?
Yeah, what happens with a lot of people is, I have a government credit card for when I have to travel, to DC or Atlanta or wherever on government business for, my position as NTU on negotiating teams or things of that nature. I keep it totally separate. There's a special place for my government credit card. It's not in with anything else. It's not in my wallet. I don't have it. There are a lot of people who keep their government credit cards in their wallet sometimes because they may use it more often. A revenue officer, a revenue agent who's using it for gas, that sort of thing. And they just don't pay attention to what credit card they're using. So yeah, it does happen where people will make inadvertent purchases on their government credit card. And at one time, I did have somebody that did a political contribution on that, and it was a mess, and it wasn't pretty at all. We ended up getting it resolved without much problem because they, freely admitted they just screwed up. But, that's not something you want to have to go through. The management investigations, the TIGTA investigation, you don't want to have to deal with that kind of thing. So again, err on the side of caution.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. So I think the bottom line here, Duncan, and this is what we have said for years. If you have a question or you're not sure about something you're about to do or been asked to do, talk to your local chapter. In Indiana, talk to Duncan Giles and one of his people that work for Chapter 49 with Chapter 49. Or if you're in another state, talk to your local chapter. That chapter will get you the answer, and they will give you an answer that is very clearly is on one side or the other. They're going to keep you out of it. Most chapters I know are going to keep you out of that gray area. There's no
Yeah.
reason for
Yep.
you to be there. As Duncan has said, yes, it does exist, but it's our recommendation. You don't even go clearly don't go into that. Make sure you're on the right side of that law. You never want to get questioned, because going through TIGTA investigations, and boy, you and I have both represented people in that. And then when it goes to Office of Special Counsel, it goes to a whole other level. You can't
Oh,
even,
yeah.
there is a potential for criminal prosecution. I don't know how often it happens, but I have to tell you, management and the government in general is very aggressive in going after Hatch Act violations. So we really don't want to have to defend you. Okay, we will, but we don't want to have to defend you if you're a member of NTEU or in our bargaining unit. Let's move on to maybe a happier subject, retirement, because we know that people like to retire toward the end of the year. Actually, sometime this time of the year is a time where some people like to retire. There's always those articles about best time to retire. End of the year is one of them, or close to the beginning of the following year. But you really do need to plan ahead, Duncan, because it's important. And you've mentioned this before, and it's really a good time to go over this again. You want to make sure you begin that retirement application process well ahead of time, but you don't want to do it too early either. So kind of explain that window of opportunity.
Yeah. For IRS employees, we use what's called the GRB platform, that you go in, you can get a retirement estimate on that. And it's usually pretty close, because I've checked mine to see what I figured it up as, because I do this for a lot of people, figuring out, what they'd be looking at. And, it's pretty close, but, the form itself that you do on this GRB platform asks a lot of very specific questions that you want to make sure you get the correct answers to. So, I urge everybody, if they're looking to do this anytime soon, read the instructions. I know that, especially guys, I'm one. Read the instructions. Now I'll figure it out as I go along. No, read the instructions on this, because, when you're talking about how you're going to, if you have a spouse, how much about your surviving spouse is going to get of your pension, your life insurance, your health insurance, dental, all of that. You want to make sure that that's done. Now, people go, when should I do this? And that gets to be the fun part. You probably want to turn this in. I say somewhere between 30 to 60 days before you're planning to retire. And people go, well, I should do it, much further in advance. No, you shouldn't. The reason is that they do not process that retirement paper. Our best folks, who are very, very good, they're very well trained and are able to help you with this. Our retirement specialists, the best folks, won't even process this until the day that you retire. And people go, well, why do they wait? They know I'm going to retire on this date. Why do they wait? Because you have the contractual right to pull back your retirement up until the day that you do retire. And I've seen this happen where we had one employee several years ago who was having great fun with this, because they like to yank their manager's tail. And they had they did this 3 different times. After the 3rd time, I talked to the employee and I said, okay, you've had your fun. If you're going to go for a date, stick to it, please. It's just, it can create havoc, but you can pull that back. So therefore, they won't even start processing that paperwork until that happens. So you want to do it, like I said, 30 to 60 days. Let's say you get a retirement date in mind, and as Larry said, there's always going to be, these things that are out, the best day to retire. And that's usually going to be when the end of a month is also the end of a pay period. That's when they usually advise you to retire, or, December 31st, the end of the year. The reason they say end of the month is because that way you'll get your first annuity check that much quicker. So, you want to give it 30 to 60 days to, go in beforehand, make sure that your paperwork is complete on GRB before you submit it. Submit it 30 to 60 days before that retirement date. And then, wait for the specialist to contact you if they have any questions, problems, issues. And then once they do that, once they're finished with it, they send it to OPM, and it becomes a whole other time frame that we won't even go into here today. But I just wanted to make sure that people knew, give it 30 to 60 days if you're getting ready to retire to submit your paperwork.
And I got to give credit to the people, the best specialists that were around at the time I retired, because it's as Duncan alluded to, it's a complicated filing. You have a lot you have to deal with, and it's easy to make an error. And I got a phone call from Best, and they perfect your paperwork, and that is so important, because if all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed before it goes to OPM, because if OPM has to stop, it takes a lot longer and elongates that time you get your first full check and back pay for. You get that smaller annuity until everything is settled and everything is decided upon. So I got to give the IRS people, when I retired in late 2011, tremendous kudos to them, and I think they still do that. So that's why Duncan is talking about these timelines. Observe those timelines to put your paperwork in, cooperate with the best specialist. Excuse me. And the way you do it as an employee, if you have life insurance or tax withholding changes, you do it through your agency. Once you retire, you do that through OPM. They have a very good website. And if you're on the website and have your password there, you can make those changes right online, or you can call them. Now, OPM gets very busy, just like IRS gets busy at times. So you're better off using the website if you can, but you can always call them and make the change as well. I did have to call them once on a complicated issue I couldn't do online. And I decided I called them the day after Thanksgiving. I got right through to somebody. So I don't think that would happen all the time, but it was around that time I was going to need to call them. So I strategically decided to call the Friday after Thanksgiving. That worked out okay. Good advice. And again, if you have questions on your retirement in Indiana, talk to Duncan. He's dealt with a lot of these questions. And in your local chapters, there are people in all the local chapters who can help you if you have questions on retirement. I think NTEU does an excellent job of advising people within our bargaining unit how to handle that. Any final comment on retirement?
Yeah, two quick things. NTU partners with United Benefits, who can give great advice on retirement, what you may want to do for planning, things of that nature. And the second thing is, just this week, for a long-time employee, they didn't have any idea how to figure out what they would be getting in retirement, what they'd be looking at. And, I basically worked it up for them based on the number of years they've been there. They gave me the grade and the step. I was able to work on that. And again, it's based on, they say high threes. It's actually the high 36 months, your last high 36 months, which is usually the last 36 months that you've worked, to give them the information. And, I always do this for people. I want people to be able to retire when they want to retire. And I don't feel that they know if they can retire until they have all the available information. So I'm always happy to do that for folks, to try and help them make a more informed decision. That's one of the really rewarding parts of my job.
Yeah, so we've had the United Benefits people on the podcast. They gave very good advice, and that is a benefit that NTU does provide its members. Really quickly, Duncan, we talked about the CR, the continuing resolution. And a 6-month one would be really tough on many agencies, IRS being one, defense being another. But one that could impact people, most people are under FERS now. When you retire, you deal with Social Security Administration. The man who runs the Social Security Administration, and NTU, I think, represents a very tiny part of SSA. Most of it's represented by another union, but we still think it's important for people to know this, particularly if you're planning on retiring, that the Commissioner of Social Security says either a flat budget for the whole fiscal year or a long CR, which is a flat budget for 6 months, and this is the word he used, would be devastating to the agency's customer service, that SSA would need to institute a hiring freeze, and it would see its workforce fall to a 50-year low. So you know that demands on that agency continue to be high. So as you retire, think about the fact that the Congress needs to take care of Social Security.
Absolutely, yeah. Not only the Social Security funds, which everybody is always worried about, but the actual employees in Social Security who, like you say, do give out good information. They can't give advice, but they give out great information and are very, very helpful. So you don't want those folks to fall by the wayside or have a hiring freeze where you can't get through to them and it gets everybody frustrated.
And Duncan, time for your final comment.
Yeah, I had interesting experience recently, was on sitting in and listening to a couple of focus groups of IRS employees. And the second one I listened to was very experienced folks, talked about, things like training and where the problems were in that, and things that you've all, that we've seen for years and years and years. The first one I was sat in with was relatively new employees. And I gather that many of them were younger, and it's a wholly different mindset, talking about why is everything so stringent? Why is everything so, demanding and so on time? And how are we going to deal with this? Because, sometimes life comes up and I need to be off for this, or, I'm moving, or I've got this home issue or this type of thing going on. And people want to be there. They want to have much more flexibility. And unfortunately, with a lot of our positions, especially things like being in the TAC offices and the walk-ins or on the phones, where you don't have that availability. So it was very interesting. And I talked to an executive this week about that, and they said that the IRS does need to figure out how to be more flexible for this type of workforce that, as more and more of them are coming in.
Yeah, and IRS is not the only employer who's been talking about this. This is something that's going on throughout the private sector as well as government sectors at every level. I want to talk about a GAO, General Accountability Office report that came out recently, just this week, and it looked at the IRS workforce, the makeup of it as of 2022, and it came up with a couple of very interesting conclusions. The first one, and this is, I think, a very positive thing, was that the IRS workforce is more diverse than the general federal workforce. I mean, I think we have 90,000 employees. That's not FTEs. That's like number of employees. Some of those are not working every day. And, it could be seasonal or have other, employment situations, but 90,000 human beings work at some point at the IRS and will increase if plans go as expected. So the GAO report that was published said, okay, you've got a great workforce by and large, more diverse, and it's a positive thing for IRS. On the other hand, when it comes to your executive and high management officials, you don't have much diversity at all, or just a very low level of diversity. So even though the IRS workforce became more diverse between 2013 and 22, that did not persist through all the ranks, especially at the higher levels, Duncan. Do you think that, based upon what you see every day and have seen for years, does that seem accurate to you?
I would say that they are improving almost every day in diversity. I do see more diversity than I did, say 7-8 years ago. They really are wanting to make sure that they do have a executive, not only executive cadre that reflects the work group that they have, the IRS, but also the public in general. So I do think that the IRS is making strides in that. As always, is it something we could do better at? Sure, we could do better at everything. Everybody can do better at everything. But I do think that they are making strides in becoming more diverse.
And you just heard Duncan Giles, chapter president for NTEU Chapter 49, and you have been listening to the Chapter 49 podcast. We try to make this a weekly podcast as best we can, and we encourage you to subscribe to our podcast. It's a podcast by Larry Lannan. I do a wide range of podcasts. This is just one of them, but you can see the Chapter 49 podcast. They're either on YouTube or on your audio podcast platform where you are listening right now. So we thank you for spending time with us. In the meantime, please be safe and be kind.